So, namaskar, friends, and welcome to lecture number 43. As told you earlier, we are going to talk about Jasmine, one of the best known works by Bharati Mukherjee. And not only that, it happens to be one of the path breaking works of Indian diaspora in the sense it marks a departure from other diasporic texts where, you know, most of the characters are torn between home and host, and so continue to try to live in a liminal space, maintaining both their halves. But here we find that it's a rich, layered novel that explores themes of immigration, identity transformation, and female agency. First published in 1989, it tells the story of a young Indian woman who travels from India, the remote part of India, Punjab, to the United States and undergoes series of reinventions, each marked by a new name and a new persona. So here we go. It's the third novel by Bharati Mukherjee, published in 1989. As I said, the earlier two were The Tiger's Daughter and Wife. And as I said, this is the most celebrated and critically acclaimed novel by Bharati Mukherjee. And it comes out from an earlier story by the same name, Jasmine, which was part of the Middleman and Other Stories. The only difference is that in that story, the protagonist comes from Trinidad, and in this story, she comes from India. But so fascinated was the writer from the earlier Jasmine that she thought of, uh, creating a full novel surrounding her life. It is understood as autobiographical in nature, but not quite. Uh, I mean, that way, I have always told you that most of the diasporic texts might look like autobiographical. Why? Because they also talk about the, travels of the protagonists very much like their creators. So that way, you will find that they all are similar in some sense, but not quite, because Jasmine happens to be a completely fictional character, and the roots of her life are completely different from the routes undertaken by her creator. Bharati Mukherjee comes from an elitist stock, while Jasmine is a destitute. Bharati Mukherjee travels to US as a legal migrant for studies first, and then she marries Canadian novelist Clark Blaze and settles down there with a brief stint in Canada. Not that brief, but yeah, I mean, looking at her own life. So they don't have a parallel as such, but they share the same kind of spirit, that we can say, in that Jasmine turns out to be a mouthpiece of Bharati Mukherjee, who has always tried to seek a visible space in America and has detested living on the margins, parodying and pumping your difference and helplessness. That is not her way. So she was a fighter, and she always fought for a visible space in the American literary market, and she also wanted to be recognized as an American writer, not writer of Indian American descent. So Mukherjee, after intentional migration from India, finally settles in America, and Jasmine also settles in America. So there are some parallels, of course, uh, but she does not, and rightly so. Bharati Mukherjee, when asked whether she considers Jasmine as her replica, in one of her interviews, she says, uh, Jasmine contains the shape of my life and my desires, but no incident is at all autobiographical. So, as I said, she is a fictional character who somewhat shares the intentions of and the philosophy of the author. So, Mukherjee's personal experiences of dislocation and displacement deeply inform her portrayal of the immigrant journey, enabling her to authentically depict the protagonist's struggles in the novel. And that much is part of, we can say, something that is informed by her own personal experiences. For that matter, we'll find that all these writers of Indian diaspora parallel their own journeys with their characters. Why? Because they have also migrated from their own country and have their own experiences of identity crisis, culture shock, alienation, uh, and their adjustment problems, and calling for a revisioning of their life or revisioning of their philosophy. So it's obvious that their world is deeply affected by their own personal experiences. New York Times, while commenting on this work, says one of the most suggestive novels we have about what it is to become an American. So, Bharati Mukherjee, let us try to find out the philosophy behind this novel. Why Bharati Mukherjee, unlike her predecessors or her successors, thinks like this. If we talk about 1960s and early 70s, when she started writing her novels, at that point in time in America, the Indians were so few, their immigration policy was very strict, and as a result, for Indians it was not welcoming, and that is why she suffered that invisibility in that American space, and she fought for her own recognition as a person and as a writer. And as a result, she realized that many people like her who have left behind their home and willingly traveled to America to chase their American dream should be benefiting from that American dream if they don't look back in nostalgia and become weak. So she is a fighter and adapter, and she wants to send down that message to her characters as well. And barring her initial two novels, where she is still struggling to come to terms with her expatriate and immigrant sensibilities, the same struggles are visible in the struggles of Tara Banerjee and Dimple Das Gupta in the initial two novels. Uh, but come her short stories like Darkness and The Middleman, especially The Middleman and other stories, is a celebration. And she says that she is not moving from Canada to America, rather, she is moving from aloofness of expatriation to exuberance of immigration. So she looks back at her life in Canada with disappointment, anger, and anguish. Why? Because there she was, racially othered and was not recognized as per her talent. And as such, she found Canadian society, despite Canadian nation, declaring multiculturalism as its policy, as primarily racist, and that's why she chose to go back to America. And after coming back to America, she realized that this is the most welcoming nation, and this is where she always longed to belong, and this is where she belongs to. And there is no point for her to talk about her gory past or her experiences in India, because she was not forced, but rather she chose to be where she is. And America provided her realization of her dreams, and she reached the coveted stage in her life as professor emerita. at University of Berkeley, California. So she had all the reasons to celebrate her journey to America. If we look at this novel, it's very characteristic, but its narrative is something that is very uncharacteristic. The novel begins with a small chapter, and this small chapter sets the theme is like a prologue, we can say, and we don't know what to expect. The novel begins like lifetimes ago under a banyan tree in the village of Hasnapur. An astrologer cupped his ears, his satellite dish to the stars, and foretold my widowhood and exile. I was only 7 then, fast and venturesome, scabrous armed from leaves and thorns. No, I shouted, you are a crazy old man. You don't know what my future holds. Uh, Suit yourself, the astrologer cackled. What is to happen will happen. This sets the tone of the novel. In fact, uh, by now we realize that the narrator may be somebody quite old, maybe 100 years or 200 or millennia old, because only such an old person can talk about lifetimes ago, an experience in lifetime that is many years back. But then by the end of this chapter, we come to know about Jasmine being just 24, as he says, and she talks about what saves her life right in the beginning. She has been foretold of widowhood and exile, and she has tried her utmost best to ward off this ghost of prophecy wherever she has gone, and finally she has been able to overcome that. So she she also talks about couple of such unpleasant experiences at the age of 7. She chucked hard on uh, hate by this astrologer. She falls, she bleeds, she gets a star-shaped scar right in the middle of her forehead, and that further scares her. A lady coming from a traditional village, and now her face is scared, and so her sisters worry about her, that now it will be difficult for the family to find a suitable match for her now that she has further been scared and disfigured. But then at that point in time also we find that she is a fighter, and she doesn't concede defeat. Rather, she announces that this is my third eye, and now I can see through things. So there is another episode in which she is paddling in race in the nearby pond, and she comes across a rotten dead body of puppy, and when she touches it, it breaks into two, a foul stench coming out of it, and that's really something hateful, and that stench enters her life, and she says that it has never left her. It has acted as a reminder that she does not have to rot like that puppy somewhere. Rather, she has to make her life meaningful and fight to the core. So towards the end of the first chapter, she says that stench stays with me. I am 24 now. So lifetimes ago gives us a semblance of somebody who is talking from the experience of hundreds of years. But here we find that the narrator is only 24. So, what compels the narrator to begin the story in that fashion is quite fascinating. And we would certainly be interested in knowing those intervening 17 years that compelled her to begin her story just like that, where the early part of her life looks like lifetimes ago. That stench stays with me. I am 24 now. I live in Baden, Elsa County, Iowa, but every time I lift a glass of water to my lips, fleetingly, I smell it. I know what I don't want to become. So, this small chapter promises a very intriguing tale of boldness, struggles, and identity formation, because we are easily lured by this description in which the protagonist talks about lifetimes ago, and she talks about life in a remote Punjab village called Hasnapur, and at the moment she is in Baden, Iowa, USA. So it's interesting to see how her life unfolds. If you look at the summary of the novel, we'll find that this novel is the story of Jasmine, who is born Jyoti in the remote village of Punjab, Hasnapur, and from there, she moves to Jalandhar as the newly wedded teen wife of Prakash Bij, a modern man who gives her a new identity, a new name, Jasmine, and who believes that she has the capability to quicken the world with her fragrance wherever she goes. So she comes as a gust of fresh air wherever she goes. That itself talks about uh, she being bright despite all destitution and limitations. And later on, while detailing her life, she says that she was good at English right in the beginning, and the village masterji believed in her, and she had lot of struggles staying in school beyond her third grade, because her father used to be a Lahori Lala, and he was a patriarch, and they never believed that a girl should be allowed to study beyond third grade, and so he did not want her to stay in the school, but with great reluctance, she managed to go to school even beyond her third grade. And right since the beginning, she was like lotus blooming out of mud, and anybody could see that she is different and she is cut out for something bigger than what has been given to her at birth. So as the story unfolds, a series of unfortunate incidents. First, her father is gored by a bull and dies a horrible death, and later on, she manages to fall in love with Prakash Bij, who is a modern man who has applied to US for his higher studies, and is a forward looking young man. She, with the help of her brothers, gets married to him. It's a love marriage, and that way she shuns the traditions of her family, and she dares come out of that and pursue her dreams and desires. And but as she believes that she has found the right man, and they are dreaming together for a better life, in that uh, Prakash is about to leave to pursue his higher studies in US. On the eve of his departure, he is killed in a bomb blast by the Khalsa Alliance, who are terrorist outfits, demanding a separate Khalistan. And so, that leaves her destitute, and now she has either one option to go and confine herself to her village, be a destitute forever, and lead the life of widowhood, as the astrologer initially told her she would. But she is one who does not believe in giving up. So suddenly she declares that she would like to go to America. To the wondering her brothers and other family members, who are taken by surprise, young lady without passport, without legal documents, without money, going to America, she must be mad. But then, she does not mind it, and she undertakes this journey. Now, life, uh, you know, takes her to different routes where she does not have money, she does not know where is she heading to. And finally, when she enters America, she is raped in a remote motel in Florida by the ship captain who carried her to America illegally, half face. And again, at that point in time, uh, you know she enters the washroom to clean herself, and first thought that comes to her mind is to balance her defilement with her death. She feels like committing suicide, now that uh, her chastity has been violated. But suddenly, her desire to survive, her desire to live, overpowers her desire to die, and she suddenly changes her mind, and she says that it is the wrongdoer who should die, not her, because she has not committed any mistake or any crime. And in that, she slices her tongue, blood oozing out of her mouth. It falls over all over her naked body, congeals, and she turns out to be a vengeful image of goddess Kali. And when she comes out of the bathroom, she kills that monster in a brutal fashion. And that is, her first encounter with America. And a new Jasmine is born there. She is distraught in body, without any food or any money for days altogether. And there, true to her belief that goddess will always help, Lillian Gordon, a kind Quaker lady, comes and rescues her, and she keeps her in her house for several months. And there she is trained into walking, talking, and dressing like Americans. And then finally, she leaves uh, Lillian Gordon with a letter of introduction in the name of her daughter, Kate Gordon, who lives in New York. And when she goes to New York, she feels an urge, uh, to meet the benefactor and the mentor of her husband Prakash, who has been living in the US. His name is Devinder Badhera, and she lives for 5 months with the Badheras. But then she finds that although she is provided for, uh, she has limited freedom, because she is treated as uh, a pathetic widow of a former student, and is not expected to compete with Nirmala, the young wife of Devinder Badhera. And she finds it very difficult for her, because she is still 17 and has not seen enough of life. So, although she finds the atmosphere there quite protective in that ghetto, but still soon she becomes fed up with that, and she runs away from there and goes to Kate Gordon, who manages a job for her in the house of Taylor Hayes and his wife. Taylor is a professor in Columbia University, and she has been entrusted with the duty to look after his 9-year-old daughter Duff. Taylor and Oily both are pursuing their dreams. Oily is a performing artist, and then she is living there like a family. She is not treated like an ayah, rather, she is called an au pair, uh, but she is not treated as a maid servant. She is treated like a family member, and she finds this American society, quite democratic that way, where even somebody who is doing menial job like her is also treated with utmost respect and dignity. So later on, Wiley leaves Taylor for another lover, and then they are left alone, and she falls in love with Taylor, and they are living like uh, a family. And this world, gives us so much uh, protection, economic and otherwise, that she doesn't want to leave this world. But as the ill luck would have it, one day she sights the same person, Sukhwinder Sukhi, the same person belonging to Khalsa Alliance, who had triggered that bomb blast and killed her husband in New York, and she runs away from there, fearing her own life. And she lands in Iowa, where she is currently living with a small town banker, whose name is Bud Ripplemeyer. So when the story opens, she is Jane Ripplemeyer, unwed wife, although she is pregnant with the child of Bud Ripplemeyer. She is still unwed, and she is also a foster mother of Du, Vietnamese orphan who has been adopted by the couple Bud Ripplemeyer and Jane Ripplemeyer, and they are living in uh, Elsa County, Baden, Iowa, and they are living a comfortable life, barring that uh, Bud Ripplemeyer was shot at by some defaulter of his bank, and so he is confined to a wheelchair. So ultimately, we find how Jasmine undergoes several transformations and has her own way. I will not just talk about that at this moment, but as Yeddu Vijay Babu concludes, Bharati Mukherjee Jasmine is a multi-dimensional novel filled with diverse socio-cultural experiences and relates to a process involving multifaceted negotiation, and in exchange it does not share any hostile estrangement from her native soil. So it is only after the publication of this novel Mukherjee confesses that it was writing in that book that I transformed myself from being an expatriate to realizing I am an immigrant. My roots are here, there is no going back. So let me make it clear that Bharati Mukherjee makes a clear distinction between expatriate and immigrant. She believes that expatriate are those who are more loyal to their home country and always look back and continue to live on their expatria, that is their former roots. And immigrants are venturesome, they are adventurous, they are forward looking people who are there to grab hold of all the opportunities that are there for them in the host country. And so she scoffs at people who are expatriates because she finds it self defeating and regressive rather than a progressive attitude. And she more than once has said that there is no point looking back at a past which I can never go back to. Rather, if I have to make something of my life, I have to look at my present and my future, and that is what I would like to do. I may be coming from a Brahmin family, Bengali family in India, but now that I have crossed borders, I have landed in America, that identity of mine is gone. I have to refashion myself and seek a new identity in this new country. And all through her life kept this philosophy of hers. And as I said, Jasmine comes very close to her philosophy in that we find that Jasmine has left behind her past, a past which is not a very happy past, but she is not given to reflections on that. And even if she talks about that, she is a little ironical and humorous rather than very serious and philosophical. and she looks at it more as a historical account of the self rather than really missing something. So Jasmine is a novel that resists closure and suggests a strategy of continual transformation as a necessary and historically contingent ethic of survival. As we see in the novel, towards the end, Jasmine decides to leave Bud Ripplemere as she gets a call from Taylor, and she wants to make a new life with Taylor and Duff, and at that point in time, she leaves behind what she says her old world dutifulness and goes to her new life, because she is still very young, and she cannot be a, let's say, caretaker for life for Bud Ripplemere, and she should also enjoy her own life, a healthy, happy life. And that is the reason, at that point in time, she accepts the invitation from Taylor, and they make a move further west. And that symbolizes that this novel uh, you know believes in continual transformation of self, and resists any kind of closure or determinacy. The protagonist of this eponymous novel, who hails from Punjab, takes her life into her own hands and makes herself an American, very much like her creator. Her life story parallels the making of an American mind. So she has lot of struggles, lot of problems, but nonetheless, she is not one to give up, and keeps on trying and lead life on her own terms. At the same time, she is not somebody who can always look back at her past life and can feel pity about what has been left behind. She is forward looking, always looking for new opportunities, and always looking for transforming her identity, like the novelist herself. Because once she went for her higher studies to America, she never looked back, and then rest of the life is a history all of us know. So in the novel, Jasmine experiences multiple identity shifts as she decides to move from India to America. As I said, each of her movements is fraught with some kind of challenge, some kind of violence, some kind of transformation, and she has come out of that unscathed and has kept on marching. So each change in location and circumstance brings a corresponding transformation in her name and persona. Uh, she assumes different identities. She is born Jyoti Bij in the remote village of Hasnapur, and her identity is shaped by traditional gender roles and patriarchal society. Even when she is born, her mother tries to snip her because she doesn't want her to suffer as a dowryless fifth daughter in the family. But then she survives, and she is already a survivor. Jasmine is the name that is given to her by her husband Prakash, and Jasmine is modern and with aspirations and dreams, and living in the city of Jalandhar rather than living in the remote Punjab village. Jace, on the other hand, in between also we find that she turns out to be an image of Kali, and we can say that at that point in time she assumes the identity of Kali while killing half face the monster who defiles her chastity. And then, when she is spotted by Lillian Gordon, that kind Quaker lady who takes her home and teaches her how to survive in America, she also gives her a new name. She calls her Jazzy. So that is also one of her avatars. And then when she goes to New York and lives with Taylor, Taylor and Wiley call her Jess. And this Jess is westernized American identity, independent and surviving in the post American city, New York, amidst intellectuals. And then Jane is her identity when the novel opens. See Jane, but Jane Ripplemeyer. She lives in Elsa County, Baden, Iowa, and at this point in time, we find that she is fully embodying the role of a suburban American wife and settles with Bud Ripplemeyer. So the journey and transformation from Jyoti to Jane has not been an easy one. As I told you, she transforms, from one, she migrates from one place to another, and this migration is also not easy, as she has to, experience lot of violence, lot of torture, and lot of, uh, such negative experiences. So her transformations take place in different geographical locales like Punjab, Florida, New York, Iowa, and finally she decides to move to California. Elizabeth Bronfen remarks that this J serves as a signifier for the dialectic of a progressive engendering of identities, as this bar any already existing identities, putting them under eraser without consuming them. So, Jasmine constructs a new identity for every new situation by taking new thoughts, ideas, and skills by rising above from her sources. So, identity is not something that is given to her by her culture, but something she discovers as she journeys, inventing and reinventing herself, and that we have seen quite early in her life. She is the fifth dowryless daughter, has been disfigured uh, as she gets a star shaped, scare right in the middle of her forehead, and this is considered a kind of disfigurement for lady, especially because dowry has to be given and people have to like her in order to take her as wife. So right in the beginning, she suffers this, and had she been like other girls, she should have been traumatized, but rather than feeling traumatized or wanting, she declares that this is my third eye and I have turned a potent goddess and can see through things. So she is somewhat different, and although she is born in a very traditional patriarchal setup, at every stage in her life she, revolts, and she has her own way. So, like Bharati Mukherjee, she also shuns many of her family traditions and decides to live life on her own terms. And at times, she just wonders how she has transformed. I'm quoting, how many more saves are in me? How many more selves? How many more husbands? So, she is surprised at her own self. She chooses the American dream in India during the post independence time. The form of migration had changed. People started migrating in order to fulfill their dreams and aspirations, where a lot of them migrated for pursuing higher studies and professional jobs in different sectors. And in that period, most of these people migrated to the US, Canada, and UK. Similar is the case with Jyoti and Prakash. Together, they start to dream about a happy future. Prakash succeeds in securing admission to an American institute for studying engineering. However, when he is killed in a bomb attack, Jasmine does not give up and decides to look forward and endeavors to fulfill what Prakash and she had planned. And in the process, she experiences physical, mental, psychological, and geographical, dislocation and pain. um, and she is ready to do that. She observes once, there are no harmless, compassionate ways to remake oneself. We murder who we were so we can rebirth ourselves in the images of dreams. And friends, to me, this line is a prophetic one for all the diasporic people. If they have to realize their dreams, they have to murder their past and venture into their future. This is what is the core philosophy of Bharati Mukherjee. So the journey of Jyoti and her assimilation in America has not been so smooth. And Parekh, comments, and I quote, fear, anger, pain, bitterness, confusion, silence, irony, humor, as well as pathos underline her observations as she discovers for herself the undefined median between the preservation of the old world and the assimilation into the new one. So, Bharati Mukherjee's concept of Americanness as a perspective on life has been embodied through the image of Jasmine. America is a fantasy country for Jasmine, which assures a wonderful future, has been excellently depicted by Mukherjee in this novel. And again, in the novel, she throws this line, the moment I have dreamed 1,000 times finally arrives. This is how, you know, uh, Jasmine reacts to her reaching to America. I am not choosing between two men towards the end when she makes her final decision to part with Bud Ripplemeyer and to walk with, you know, uh, Taylor. She says, I am not choosing between two men. I am caught between the promise of America and old world dutifulness. And she settles for promise of America rather than sticking to old world dutifulness. The rape of Jasmine by Hafiz was not only a breach of harmonious coexistence, metaphorically, it stood for cultural imperialism, hegemony of West upon the East. As Edward Said opines, in any society not totalitarian, then certain cultural forms predominate over others, just as certain ideas are more influential than others. The form of this cultural leadership is what Gramsci has identified as hegemony, an indispensable concept for any understanding of cultural life in the industrial West. So, Half Face was contemptuous towards South Asians. I've been to Asia and it's the armpit of the universe. So, this is again a very important line from the novel that talks about the problems and struggles of people from our part going to America, and what valiant effort they have to undertake in order to, really realize their dreams and settle down. So friends, will continue this discussion in the next class, as well as this novel is one of the major novels of diaspora. And till now we have found out that it propagates a different kind of philosophy. Rather than talking about being in the liminal space, maintaining a balance between home and host, it talks about, dissolving your identity in the host land in order to realize your dreams and aspirations. So these are some of the references, friends. Thank you very much. We'll meet in the next class again and we'll continue our discussion on Jasmine. Thank you very much.